think it's a man that needs no introduction, author, physician, touched millions of people's lives. And thank you very much for coming to join us tonight, Dr. Esselstyn.
Gwen, thank you for those kind words, and especially for this marvelous invitation to come to GreenFare. What you, Silva, your team have done is truly remarkable. And I think it's a marvelous reflection on your leadership in this arena. And it takes pioneers like yourself to really get it going, because I guess the reason that I'm so passionate about medicine now, even though 16 years ago I retired from surgery, is because, as we'll hopefully see tonight, we're on the cusp of truly what could be a seismic revolution in health. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. If I get a little sleepy, this is one of the few times in my life that I've gotten up at 4:30 in the morning and given a presentation in the day, early in the day, and then tried it again in the evening. So we'll see what happens. Let's just start out by talking about cardiovascular disease, where I'm most familiar, and then we'll see if we can't stretch this out to figure out how we can absolutely get rid of chronic illness. The truth be known, heart disease is nothing more than a toothless paper tiger that need never exist, and if it does exist, it need never ever progress. This is a completely benign foodborne illness. And the embarrassing thing about this business, here in the United States in our health business or industry, we have built a $1 billion health plan caring for an illness that doesn't even exist in half the planet. So we got to do better. Now, let's suppose that you were to be a cardiac surgeon and you were going to hang out your shingle, maybe in rural China, the Papua Highlands, Central Africa, the Tarahumara, in northern Mexico, Okinawa. Forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. Why? Because they thrive on whole food, plant-based nutrition, and cardiovascular disease is virtually non-existent. Now, on the other hand, this is an old slide. I took this in 1968 when I was leaving Vietnam after I spent a year there as a combat surgeon. You have to hear this twice. I think you... I saw you this morning. Okay. You know, you poor guy. All right. But this is to remind me when I see the audience, I want to share with them the fact that if we autopsy our GIs who have died in combat in Korea, for instance, 80% of those GIs at an average age of 20 already have gross evidence of coronary artery disease. You can see on their autopsy, not enough for their cardiac event, but there the disease is already established. And that same study was repeated. This time in 1999, looking at young women and men who had died of accidents and homicides and suicides between the age of 17 and 34. And now, this disease is ubiquitous. Everybody. You graduate from high school in this country, you get a diploma, and you also get the Foundation for Heart Disease. Now, anybody here in this audience over the age of 17? All right, so now I've got your attention. We had a chance to get it right in World War II, when the Axis powers of Germany overran the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium, and they occupied Denmark and Norway. Characteristically, they took away their livestock for their troops. So their cattle, their sheep, their goats, their pigs, their chickens, their turkeys, gone. Suddenly, these Western European nations were plant-based. And Dr. Strom and Janssen, writing in England's leading medical journal, The Lancet, in 1951, looked at the results of heart attacks, deaths from heart attack and stroke in Norway during this time period. So let's do this together. We'll look at, here you can see 1927, strokes and heart attacks in Norway going up, 1930 going up, 35 going up, 1939, in come the Germans, whoop, 1940, whoop, 41. Who knew these Germans were these great public health educators? But look what happened. 1945, the death of Adolf Hitler, the cessation of hostilities in the European theater, back comes the meat, back comes the dairy, back come the strokes, back come the heart attacks. Look how rapidly that occurred. Now, you're now looking at, can you see it all?
A little bit.
Because it's kind of a tough angle. I hate to block your view. This artery on the right, how can you guys see? Oh, you got the little one. Maybe he wants to go there. This is an artery that is thoroughly diseased, and you're probably saying when there finally is a closure of this opening, you're probably saying that's when there'll be a heart attack. Well, actually not. This is going to cause a lot of angina, chest pain, shortness of breath, but probably not. Only about 10% of heart attacks comes from something this nasty. Why? Because this has taken decades and decades and decades to develop. And as the downstream heart muscle here is gradually deprived of oxygen and nutrients that it wants, the body tries to build its own collateral, its own blood supply, its own bypass. Little collateral vessels will develop around this that you can clearly see on an angiogram. Not enough to restore the normal flow, but enough to keep the heart from having a heart attack. We're going to find out in a few minutes how 90% of heart attacks occur. Now here on the left, what I want you to notice here is this delicate innermost lining, that dark line. Even those of you in the back can see this. That dark line is the absolute, that is the absolute, what's the word I want here? Yeah, it's the life jacket and guardian of our blood vessels. That's what I said this morning too, wasn't it? And therefore, what makes it the life jacket is it produces an absolutely magic molecule of gas, nitric oxide, which is responsible for so many marvelous functions that keep the health of our arteries intact. What are the functions of nitric oxide? One, it keeps all the cellular elements in our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. Nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide prevents the wall of the artery from becoming thickened, stiff, inflamed, protects you from high blood pressure, hypertension. Number four, and this is the key, an adequate and safe amount of nitric oxide will protect you from ever developing blockages or plaque. So literally everybody on the planet who has cardiovascular disease has their disease because they have now so sufficiently trashed, injured, and compromised the capacity of their endothelial cells to make nitric oxide. They no longer have enough to protect themselves from making blockages and plaque. But the good news here is this. This is not a malignancy. And when you can get people to stop ever again having any morsel past their lips that is going to further destroy and trash the capacity of their endothelial cells to make nitric oxide, then you can make the nitric oxide become restored to the point where it makes now enough nitric oxide that you no longer have disease progression. You stop your disease, and you can often get disease reversal. We'll talk more about that. Now, when you start eating the pizza, the cheeseburger, the milkshakes, first thing that happens is things get sticky, sticky, sticky in your blood flow, all right? And now I'm going to turn to something we don't do very often, but I have great respect for, and that is Peter Libby, who is from Harvard. Now, I went to Yale, but this man is somebody I have great respect for. And what you're looking at here, the blood is flowing up here in the blue area. These tiny little purple cells are the endothelial cells which separate the flowing blood from the arterial wall. Now, to make sense out of all this, together what we're going to do is start here on the upper left with these orange LDL cholesterol molecules, which are sticky, bump up against your sticky endothelium and migrate into the subendothelial space where they're not supposed to be. In the subendothelial space, they become oxidized by these nasty free radicals that come from what you're eating. And now the artist no longer has them orange. They're now all these yellow, small, hard, dense LDL cholesterol particles, which the body doesn't want there. So the body calls upon the SWAT team, which are our white blood cells. And they come across, and here Peter Libby has painted the white blood cells blue in honor of Yale, and we like that. But now it becomes, we change the name, it's a macrophage. And the macrophage job is to gobble up and gobble up and gobble up like Pac-Man all these small, hard, dense LDL cholesterol molecules until we now get all the way over to here. And when it's chock full with these bad LDL molecules, we then change the name and we call it a foam cell. Don't you love the way medicine does that to you? But the foam cell is truly the Darth Vader of this sequence, because the foam cell is manufacturing some nasty molecules we call metalloproteinases. These are enzymes like stromelicin, elastase, collagenase, myeloperoxidase. What do they do that is so bad? What they do that's so bad is they progressively thin out this cap over the plaque. This is a plaque blocking the artery, no more than 35%. Probably half of Washington, D.C. has something like that. No symptoms until you get 75% blocked. But here you are, the metalloproteinases are thinning out this cap over the plaque till it gets so thin that the sheer force of blood racing over it tears it. That's the seminal moment. You have now ruptured your plaque. Once you rupture your plaque, there's extravasation of plaque content into the flowing blood, which activates our clotting factors, platelets. And now in a matter of minutes, we begin to go over to B, and you can see this clot forming. And the clot now is self-propagating. So in a further number of minutes, we're all the way over to C. Look, this is a thrombosis, a clot, coronary thrombosis. All the downstream heart muscle here is now suddenly deprived of all oxygen and nutrients, and it starts to die. That's your heart attack. That's 90% of heart attacks. The classic being somebody like that beloved TV commentator of Meet the Press, Timothy Russert, working on his program Saturday afternoon, has a heart attack. The EMTs cannot get him started again. Well, he was fine the day before. Suddenly this thing ruptures, and this is the catastrophic events. Now, if I do my job correctly, this evening, every one of you and your friends and relatives should be able to make yourself heart attack proof. How are you going to do that? I'm going to do that when I'm going to get you to change your biochemistry. You're not going to do this with a pill or a drug or a stent or a bypass. They don't treat the causation of the illness. You're going to do this by changing your biochemistry with whole food, plant-based nutrition. When you change your biochemistry so profoundly, this entire sequence, this cascade of events that I've just described, doesn't happen. LDL cholesterol doesn't migrate into the subendothelial space. Things don't get sticky. You don't have the SWAT team coming across. You don't have the formation of Darth Vader, the foam cell. You don't thin out and rupture your cap over the plaque. As a matter of fact, you thicken and you strengthen the cap over the plaque. If you strengthen the cap over the plaque, it cannot rupture. If it cannot rupture, you've made yourself heart attack proof. You know how long that takes? Probably about 3 weeks. Pretty exciting stuff. Now, just when you thought that I was through with the endothelial cell, it's back. Because the endothelial cell, and here you see, forget the x-ray, but half of the artery here is plaque, the other half is open. And up until 1980, we used to think of the endothelial cell as these cute little red bricks that lined these pipes that were our wonderful arteries. That all changed in 1980. Dr. Furchtgott, working in Brooklyn, he was taking the largest blood vessel in the rodent, the aorta, and he was doing this sort of elliptical spiral staircase type cut on this aorta. And after the cut, he would lower it into a bath of saline, and it would constrict. Then one day, no cut, the whole aorta intact. Whoop, it dilated. Did it again, it dilated. Now the race was on globally. What was the EDRF that Dr. Furchtgott had discovered? Endothelial derived relaxation factor, you know, it rolls right off your tongue. And sure enough, that term was with us only 8 years, because at that time, Dr. Furchtgott, Dr. Lou Ignarro, and Dr. Murad discovered that the EDRF was a gas, nitric oxide. And for that, they got the Nobel Prize. Now, I've just told you a few minutes earlier those absolutely incredible functions of nitric oxide, okay? Now, the next thing I want you to know is how we measure nitric oxide in somebody in a research basis. You take an ultrasound probe, place it over the brachial artery here in the forearm, and there's the readout on the screen, the diameter of the artery. Then for 5 minutes, you encircle the upper arm with a blood pressure cuff, inflate it above systolic blood pressure, so that for 5 minutes, you have absolutely zero blood flow to your forearm and hand. I've had that done. It's not exactly habit forming. Then you release the cuff, and immediately with the ultrasound probe, remeasure the new diameter of the brachial artery, and then the normal individual, it'll be 30% greater. So the next great thing that was done from University of Maryland, Dr. Robert Vogel took a group of healthy young subjects to a certain fast food restaurant characterized by arches which are golden. Half of the group got their cornflakes, brachial artery tourniquet test, normal. The other group had the hash browns and sausage. Within 120 minutes after that meal, the brachial artery tourniquet test in those individuals, they could not dilate the artery. That single meal of hash browns and sausage had so trashed and injured the capacity of their endothelial cells to make nitric oxide, they could not dilate the artery. But they followed them on. The late afternoon, early evening, they began to recover. But you and I know that the next morning for breakfast, scrambled eggs and bacon. Lunchtime, white bread with cold cuts and mayonnaise. Supper time, baked potato with sour cream. Lamb chops, vegetables soaked in butter, ranch dressing on a salad, ice cream for dessert. Here in the good old USA, we start pounding and injuring those endothelial cells from age 2, 3, 4, 5, and on. It's no great surprise that as we continue to injure those vessels by our 40s, 50s, and 60s, we now have this epidemic of strokes and heart attacks and vascular dementia. Now, what you see here, although I've spent a fair amount of time on the endothelial cell, the endothelial progenitor cell, HDL cholesterol, and dimethylarginine dimethylamino hydrolase are all other marvelous defense factors that you have for your blood vessels. I don't have time to go into those this evening, but I will tell you this. Every single one of these is maximally benefited by whole food, plant-based nutrition. Yeah. Now, let's come back a minute to the endothelial cell for one time. One of the ways that we find that we profoundly can help patients, especially those with heart disease, is get them to make this lifestyle change. Now, if you've grown up in America and you have heart disease and you've been eating these Western foods, you know that a transition to whole food plant-based nutrition is significant. I won't belittle that at all. It's a significant change. But remember now, it's the way that millions and millions of people have on this planet who never have this horrible disease have been able to eat for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, I must confess that I am terribly competitive for my patients. I just hate failure. And if I have somebody who has heart disease and has angina, I want absolutely nothing more than to see them get well and get well promptly. But let's talk about human nature. Well, I really enjoyed what Dr. Esselstyn said, but I really don't know if I can give up my cheese. I'll ask somebody, how often do you eat out? Oh, not very often. I'll try again. How often do you eat out? Well, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. All right? What are those famous restaurants that you go to in Dallas known for the arrest and reversal of heart disease? Well, you want to put it that way. No, I want you to see this. The only reason you had that heart attack is because you, yourself, nobody else, ate those foods that so absolutely devastated and injured your endothelial cells that they got to the point where you couldn't stop from making plaque and had this heart attack. Now, if you're doing this eating out 3 times a week, then that's what, 156 days out of the year that you're continuing to trash an endothelial system that has already been so train wrecked that you have this heart attack. I want to see it come back. I don't have a program that's 90%. I don't have a program that's 95%. If somebody calls me on the phone and says, Dr. Esselstyn, you'd be proud of me. I'm doing your program 90%. What? That's not my program. 10% of the time you are still absolutely annihilating further endothelial cells. That doesn't work. I don't want that. I want you to absolutely blossom. Look, let's get it clear. There are 4 reasons to go out to eat. 1, you don't have to do the cooking. 2, you don't have to do the dishes. 3 is the ambiance. 4, the companionship. You never go out to eat to further destroy more endothelial cells. Anybody not clear about this? Isn't it fun? Yeah. Because it's just, this is not some great magical thing you've got to do. You've somehow just got to embrace the science, and then you can get it done. What do you suppose, I don't have it here, but in another presentation I give, I have a study of somehow 908,000 person-years of follow-up. And I particularly look at the group of men and women at age 55. In that study, you look at those men and women at age 55 who had absolutely optimal risk factors, okay? Optimal risk factors. They followed them for 30 years. By age 85, 30% of the women, 40% of the men now had heart disease. The Western diet will get you sooner or later, okay? Something to think about. All right. Let's get into the gritty. I want to share with you tonight 2 studies that I was involved in. When I was a general surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, and my duties were, I was chairman of the breast cancer task force and head of the section on thyroid and parathyroid surgery. And so in the middle of my career is when I just got so disillusioned with the fact that for no matter how many women I was doing breast surgery, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And the long and the short of it was that led to a bit of global research on my part, and it was quite fascinating to see there were many cultures where breast cancer was 30 and 40 times less frequent than the United States. And I just felt there would be more bang for the buck. Because if we looked at the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization, heart disease, if we could persuade people to eat to save their heart, they would also save themselves from breast, prostate, and colon cancer, and perhaps pancreatic. So that was the whole motivation of why I got started in 1984. And now, when I did this first study, it was small, because I was still under obligation to carry out my surgical responsibility. And I asked cardiovascular medicine if I could have about 24 patients, which was the number I could handle. Now, I was really frightened. Well, I don't know if it was frightened, but I was really anxious or concerned that the rock upon which the study would most likely flounder would be lack of patient compliance. And I didn't know in that first study, so I was not a trained psychologist, how could I get these people to do this? And I decided to use the same mantra for these patients that I had used for my cancer patients, which was something I had learned many years ago from a marvelous West Coast surgeon by the name of Bert Dunphy. And Bert had said that patients with cancer are not afraid to die, and patients with cancer are not afraid of being, patients with cases are not afraid to die, and patients with cancer are not afraid to suffer, but they are afraid of being abandoned by their family or by their physician. So for the first 5 years of the study, I saw every one of those patients in my office every 2 weeks, went over every morsel they ate, did their cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight. Now, at the end of 5 years, I got a little braver and I stretched it out to once a month. At the end of 10 years, they were now pretty well on autopilot, and so we made it quarterly. But that was interesting because the study was reported at 12 years. That's almost half of a medical career. And it makes it one of the longest. Although it was a very small study, it was make it one of the longest, and it was rather fascinating to see what was going to happen. Now, the first key here was I didn't want these folks to eat one single morsel of food that was going to injure their endothelial cells. And I should add that my late brother-in-law used to say that these patients in Essie's study were his walking dead. They had failed their first or second bypass, they'd failed their first or second angioplasty, they were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused, 5 were told by their expert clinician they wouldn't live out the year. Those 5 all made it beyond 20 years. Now, what are the foods that every time they pass your lips, you injure your endothelial cells? Any drop of oil. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures the endothelial cells, as does anything with a mother or a face. Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, eggs, and anything that is dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. Anything that is sugary, cakes, pies, cookies in excess, maple syrup, molasses, and honey in excess. I don't like coffee with caffeine. Tea with caffeine, okay. Coffee with caffeine, not okay. And now, no oil. Here, for those of you who are concerned about what I just said about oil, here is a peer-reviewed scientific study. Olive, soybean, and palm oil intake have a similar acute detrimental effect over the endothelial function in healthy young subjects. Now, this is some work from Stanley Hazen at the Cleveland Clinic. And what Stan did was he looked at patients who were omnivores. Omnivores eat these foods, these animal foods, eggs, milk, cream, dairy, seafood, meats, and so forth, that are loaded with lecithin and carnitine. But omnivores possess in their gut bacteria that when they metabolize lecithin and carnitine, they create a molecule called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which ravages and injures your blood vessels. So here's a schematic. You're an omnivore eating lecithin and carnitine. The gut bacteria produce TMAO, which contributes to vascular disease. There's your argument for those who say you ought to go paleo. Okay. Now, the other thing that Stan did, when he took somebody who was totally plant-based and gave them a lamb chop, measured their blood TMAO, hardly existent. Often I couldn't measure it. Why? Because persons who are totally plant-based do not possess in their intestine bacteria that can contribute to the manufacture of TMAO. Pretty darn powerful validation of the whole approach to plant-based nutrition. So what are you going to eat? All these marvelous whole grains for your cereal, bread, and pasta, 101 different types of legumes and beans, all those marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables, white and sweet potatoes, and some fruit. Now, what's not in my book, but something that good in it. What's not in my book, but something that is, I think, so powerful for these patients. When I have patients freshly diagnosed with heart disease, I really want to get after it. And I imagine I say, look, if you could imagine getting your head inside the artery to your heart where that disease is, you would see that disease is an absolute cauldron of oxidative inflammation. So you need what? You need antioxidants. No, do not go down to the health food store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant. It doesn't work, it's going to be harmful. You're going to get your antioxidants from food. Okay, what kind of food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value. O-R-A-C, oxygen radical absorptive capacity. So, if you're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries on your oat cereal in the morning, that's terrific as a start. But nothing can trump the antioxidant value of green leafy vegetables. So I need you to chew 6 times a day a green leafy vegetable, roughly the size of your fist, after it has first been boiled in water, 5.5 to 6 minutes or steam, so it's nice and tender. And then you must anoint it with several drops of a delightful balsamic vinegar, because the acetic acid in the balsamic vinegar restores the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So You're going to chew this alongside your breakfast cereal. Again, as a mid-morning snack. Again, with your lunch and sandwich, that's 3. Mid-afternoon, 4. Dinner time, 5. God, I adore it when you have that evening snack of kale. What are you doing? All day long, you are basking and you are bathing that horrible oxidative cauldron of inflammation with nature's most powerful antioxidants. Pretty exciting stuff. What are the green leafy vegetables I'm talking about? They are bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula, and asparagus. Now, the top 6 are gotta have a little fun. The top 6 are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, and arugula.
Beets?
Beet greens and beets. You win. Now, no oil. All right. I want to share with you several angiograms. All these angiograms show reversal of disease. These were all reviewed in triplicate in the Cleveland Clinic Angiography Core Laboratory. So when I give you a percent of reversal, I know that it's accurate. This is as small a reversal as the naked eye can see. 10% in the left anterior descending coronary artery, increasing from the left to the right. This was in a 64-year-old retired pediatrician. A little easier to see in this circumflex artery to the back of the heart. This was a 20% reversal in a 58-year-old factory worker. And this next is actually the right coronary artery, where this is a 30% improvement from the left to the right. Now, this is Joe Crow. And Joe replaced me as chairman of the Breast Cancer Task Force. And in 1996, with a cholesterol of 156, was somebody who was not a smoker, not diabetic, not overweight, no family history, regularly exercised. He began getting chest pain. Finally, in October of 96, cardiology worked him up, could find nothing that was wrong. A month later, he finished his surgical schedule and he sat down to write post-operative orders when suddenly he got this crushing elephant sitting on his chest, pain in his left jaw, shoulder, arm. Joe was having a heart attack. Whipped down to the cath lab, start the catheterization, cardiac arrest, resuscitate, finish the catheterization, one more cardiac arrest, resuscitate, stabilized, 3 days later, discharged. Very depressed. Because what happened was, at the time of his angiogram, in the left, the widowmaker, the left anterior descending, the entire lower 1/3 was so moth-eaten and diseased over too long a segment, they can't just jam in stent after stent, and it was too far down the artery for the bypass. So he was depressed. So Ann and I had him out with his wife for supper 2 weeks after his heart attack. Joe, you've been eating this absolutely terrible Western diet. You got the typical disease. We have got now 10 years of data. Why don't you think about going plant-based? And he said, well, look, they couldn't offer me anything else. I'll give it a shot. But I'm not going to take any of those statin drugs. I don't trust them. Too many side effects. Fine, your call. He became the absolute personification of commitment to plant-based nutrition. Over the next 2.5 years, his total cholesterol plummeted, and his LDL plummeted from 98 to 38. And then he had, after 2.5 years, another angiogram. So at noontime, on the day that I knew earlier that morning he'd had his follow-up angiogram, I went to across the hall to his office, walked in, and there he was, sitting at his desk. I said, Joe, I understand you had the follow-up angiogram. Mind sharing with me, how did it go? Got up from his desk, came around, put his arms around me, had a couple of these, and he said, I think we're doing okay. And I said, well, would there be any chance that I could see the angiogram? He said, sure. Now, this was very exciting for us. Here it is, no statins, completely reversal of disease. And this is not going to happen in everybody. There will be 1/4 of patients who will have a plaque that is young, soft, made up of fat, cholesterol, and inflammation, where the body can absolutely go after it. Now, there will be older plaques that have been there for decades that are made up of fibrosis and scar and calcification, which you're not going to budge. But before the evening is out, I wanted to show you how even those patients can enjoy the same type of benefits with getting back to full activities of daily living without restriction. And we'll show how that occurs. Now, we wanted to know, in those 18 patients who stuck with us for the whole 12 years, we wanted to know how many cardiac events of worsening disease they had experienced in the 8 years prior to coming into our study. And they had these 49 coronary events of worsening disease during that period. However, once they came into our study over the next 12 years, 17 of those patients had no further disease events. However, we did have one little sheep who, after 6 years, wandered from the flock, got into the lamb chops, glazed donuts, and more angina, had to have a bypass. Now he's back with the flock, but proves the point that I'm sharing with you this evening. Now, we took quite a hammering with this. We were so proud and delighted. I was just tickled to death that we had shown that with food and food alone, you could absolutely halt and reverse this disease. But not all the cardiology communities were excited about this. Hey, the study is too small, it wasn't randomized. How do you know you can repeat this again in a larger group and get the same results? So, in July of 2014, we reported this time some 200 patients who actually, it's very exciting because I think the thing that we showed was that out of those 177 out of the 198 that were followed, there were 89.3% who were adherent to our program. That's almost 90%. And we have had, over the last 9 years, we've had about 180 physicians who have sat in on our, I invite anybody who wants to come as a physician to see what it is we do, and we share all our strategies. Now, our present strategy is that if you are going to succeed with having patients do this, in my opinion, you must show the patient respect. The only way that I know to show a patient respect, asking them to make this profound a lifestyle change, is to give them my time. Now, at the present, our patients are coming throughout the United States, Canada, and overseas. They cannot stay in Cleveland, where I work, for days at a time. Therefore, we felt obligated to give them all this information in one single day, 5.5 hours. We limit it to no more usually than 12 or 15 patients, always with their spouse or significant other who comes for free. At the seminar, they're going to learn exactly how they created their disease, and precisely how they can be empowered as the locus of control to halt and reverse their disease. Now, my secretary will give me a list of these patients 2 weeks before the seminar, because I'm old-fashioned enough that I insist on calling every one of them myself, because I want to get my arms around their story. I want to have them have an opportunity to ask questions of me, so that coming to the seminar, we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward. Now, how do you know these were sick patients? 119 of those 177 had already had a stent or a bypass. That's the degree of severity of their illness. But look at here. Here were 27 patients who, before they came to see us, were told that they had to have a stent or a bypass, and they never had to have it after going through the program. Now, here's the key: recurrent events. In a group that followed our program, one patient, while traveling in China, he totally misbehaved. He had a small stroke. And those who were non-adherent, 62%, had adverse events. Now let's do this. Let's compare our results with what we think are some of the best studies in cardiology today. Here you see the number of people who have, the number of events. Major cardiac events are heart attack, stroke, and death. The Lyon diet heart study, that Mediterranean diet study, at the end of 4 years, 25% had a heart attack, stroke, or death. The Natural History of Heart Disease, Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City, 20%. Bill Bowden's Courage study, 19%. So here we are, 0.6%. That's over a 30-fold difference. What's the difference? The difference is we are treating the causation of the illness. And there's been a basic covenant of trust between the caregiver and the patient since the days of Hippocrates, that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of the illness. And today in cardiovascular medicine, that's just not happening. And it's not because of malice of forethought. Cardiologists, as largely as a group, are compassionate and caring and really want to see their patients succeed. How much training do they get in medical school in nutrition? How much training do they ever get in their postgraduate training in cardiology and nutrition? Practically zero. 2 years ago, I was asked to join the American College of Cardiology Nutrition Committee. And of the 12 or 8, of the 16 or thereabouts who are involved, I would say there's a nucleus of about 5 of us who are doing what we can to really drive this point home. And I think we're going to see that change. Now, here's another study that of all things, came out again in July of 2014. 3 patients. What in the world, what business do I have writing up 3 patients? Well, these 3 patients were absolutely all an example of the present tragedy of the way that cardiovascular medicine is treating patients. The first, I'll give you his name, Bob Mercer. I've never met the man. He is from Newfoundland, Canada. When he was 44, he had a complete blockage of his right carotid artery and had a stroke. And at that same time, he had such severe chest pain that they finally found a surgeon in Toronto who would operate on him, even though he only had one more carotid. His left was still open, but it was 27% blocked at that time. He had a great result from that surgery. But now, at age 69, he was in trouble again. He was diabetic. He had gained 40 pounds. He had severe angina, and he had erectile dysfunction. And his carotid, which had been 27% blocked, the one remaining one, was now 90% blocked. Of all things to happen, at that point, his daughter, age 37, had a heart attack. And during her convalescence, she went to a bookstore and found a book called, and she took it to her father and said, "Pop, we got to do this together." A year later, I got a phone call. I got a long letter. "Dear Dr. Esselstyn, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. I've lost 40 pounds. My diabetes has gone away. All my chest pain, angina has disappeared. My erectile dysfunction has gone away. My left carotid artery, which was 90% blocked when I started this, is now 67% blocked. So, pretty exciting stuff. Now, this next I'll share with you is Art Soteris. He's actually a local guy in Cleveland. At age 32, he developed diabetes. He was carrying a fair amount of extra weight, and by the time he was 42, he had his first attack of angina that led to 14 stents over the next 8 years. Then they went to his bedside. The stents weren't working. You have to have a bypass. That was good for 1.5 years. Then he was told there was nothing further to do except try these drugs. He didn't want to die. Somehow found us over the internet, lost 40 pounds, lost his diabetes, lost his angina, and now regularly comes to our seminar to share his story with others in attendance. Now, summarizing, if you compare this with what is done standardly, there's no mortality with the diet, there's no morbidity with the diet, there's no extra expense, you got to eat, and all you do is you improve with the passage of time. And if you compare what's going on mostly today, most patients who've had a heart attack are out there like a puppy in the deep grass wondering, when is the other shoe going to fall? When do I get my next heart attack? Nonsense. You never have another heart attack. You eat in a way that you strengthen your plaque, strengthen the cap over the plaque. It cannot rupture. You restore your endothelium, you can't get another heart attack. Pretty exciting. All right. Now, wait a minute. What in the world is the good of having a great heart if your brain doesn't work? By age 85 in this country and in Sweden, 50% of citizens have dementia. Now, we know from the wonderful work of Megan Leary and her team from the West Coast who, in 2001, reporting at the stroke meetings in Miami, they had looked at over 5,500 MRIs of the brains of Americans. What do they begin to see at age 50? Tiny little white spots, all right? What are they? Little strokes, okay? So here you are at age 50, big brain, tiny stroke, not a problem. Well, now you're 65, you've had 15 more years of the good old American diet. More often than before, you say to your sweetheart, where did I leave the car keys? Oh, come on, you get over that. Bingo, you're now 75. You've had 10 more years of the good old American diet. You look at her and you say, where did I leave the car? Well, you kind of get through that somehow. Bingo, you're 85. And you look at her and you say, are you my sweetheart? I can't change that. You don't suddenly wake up on your 85th birthday with dementia. You work hard in all those preceding decades to lay the foundation of that dementia that occurred. All right. Here's a normal MRI. Here's one where I counted 90 of these little strokes. Can you imagine a message trying to go through all that scar? No. Now here what you see, on the other hand, here is a brain right up to the skull. Big, full brain. Over here, wait a minute, what is this big gap between the brain and the skull? That's brain atrophy. You don't want brain atrophy. If you get brain atrophy, you forget to get your remote ready in time. How do you stop brain atrophy? You exercise. If you're going to do it with walking 4 or 5 times a week, fast enough so you're about to break a sweat, or swimming or biking, something, exercise. Exercise enlarges the hippocampus, your memory, the frontal lobe, your executive thinking. And here, the muscle. What you see on the upper left here is the thigh muscle in a 40-year-old triathlete. Upper right, the decrepit thigh muscle in a 74-year-old couch potato. Lower right, in a 70-year-old triathlete. Keep it going, keep exercising. It's truly a bonus. It cannot trump food, but it's so important. All right, now here was one of the most striking moments that we had in our whole study. On the left, you're looking at the pulse volume on the right ankle of a gentleman who, coming to my office when we first started this, had to stop 5 times while crossing the skyway because of pain in his right calf because of a partially blocked artery in his thigh. So I was so focused on his heart, I forgot all about his calf. 11 months later, he said, Dr. Esselstyn, when I first started seeing you, you may recall I had to stop 5 times crossing the skyway to your office. Yep. He said, you know, the last month it got to be 4 times, 3 times, 2 times, 1 time. I don't stop anymore. Okay, Don, back you go to the vascular lab. And again, here we are. Another pulse volume. It is now double what we had before. And this was absolutely such a seminal moment for us because we now had absolutely rock-solid, irrefutable scientific evidence that food and food alone could arrest and reverse cardiovascular disease. And you're going to say, well, wait a minute. What about his statin drugs? 1986, we didn't have any statin drugs. So there's 2 patients tonight that I've shared with you. Dr. Crow, who refused. Don, they weren't available. For the patients who come to us who are so miserable with statins, too many neuromuscular pains, they've gotten diabetes, they've gotten liver changes, they've got brain fog from it. If they're willing to do this 100%, they're gonna be all right. All right. Now here's another. This was a retired high school chemistry teacher. At age 78, he and his wife absolutely adored entering square dance contests. But it was during the fast square dance, he was getting bilateral calf pain. And so he saw some vascular surgeons, and they got these films, and you see here how diseased his legs were. And he came to see us and said he didn't like the idea of that big operation. He said, if I choose your method, Dr. Esselstyn, how long will it take to get rid of the pain? So I looked at him with great wisdom in my face. And I said, probably about 10 or 11 months. 3 months later, I got a phone call. Dr. Esselstyn, you do not speak the truth. The pain is gone. Now, I don't know what it's like here in Maryland, or Delaware, or Pennsylvania, or Virginia, wherever you guys are from. But in Cleveland, Ohio, when you are watching a mystery or a sporting event, just before the advertisement comes on, you will hear the mellifluous tones of the announcer say something like, when the moment is right, will you be ready? Now, we all know that the penile artery is much smaller than the coronary artery. So not infrequently, before somebody comes down with heart disease, they may find they're unable to raise the flag. However, all is not lost. Not infrequently, 10 or 11 months after I've counseled somebody, I'll get a phone call. Dr. Esselstyn, yes. This is Mr. So-and-so. Yeah. Yeah, I thought I really ought to give you a call because recently something has come up. And I'm wondering if I don't owe you another check. Now, I promised you at one point today that if you have the kind of plaque that is made up of fibrosis and scar and calcification, and it's not going to go away, how does the patient get this relief? Why do they do just as well? Okay? Hold on to your seat because this is going to be tough. Ask me questions if you don't understand it. You're now looking at a PET scan, a PET rubidium dipyridamole scan. And if it is orange or yellow, this is good perfusion. Now this is a 60-year-old stockbroker in Cleveland with a 248 cholesterol. The first time I saw him was after he had his scan, and here it's all green. And this is poor perfusion right there. So we counsel him at that point. 10 days later, his cholesterol is down to 137. 3 weeks later, we repeat the scan. Bingo. It's back. We didn't wash out the plaque in 3 weeks. That doesn't ever happen. What's going on here? That is the heart, without any muscle. Now, all the heart arteries that you hear about and read about, it gets stents and get bypasses and the widowmaker and all that stuff, those are what we call the epicardiac coronary artery. The epicardial position is, those are the arteries that are riding on the surface of the heart. That's why they can get stents. That's why they can get bypassed. They haven't dived into the muscle yet. So you've got your circumflex, your left anterior descending, your right coronary artery. These are the big ones. But look at that. Look at the thousands and thousands and thousands of vessels, all interdigitating here, that have dived into the muscle. So, 2 years ago, I called the head of cardiovascular pathology at the Cleveland Clinic, who does dissection of 200 hearts a year from those who are deceased. And I said, how often do you ever see good old standard variety coronary artery disease in the artery once it has dived into the muscle? Never. What? Well, once in a very, very, very great while, maybe somebody who's a severe diabetic. Other than that, not there. So, what's going on is this. When we first see these patients, and they're kind of devastated by their heart disease, and they start doing this correctly, eating correctly, eating the green leafy vegetables correct. By the way, the green leafy vegetables 6 times a day is not for patients who don't have heart disease. That's for the patients to do. So these patients start doing it correctly. And what occurs is this. Before they see us, before they change, they're eating the Western diet. Even this entire intramuscular cascade is thoroughly diseased. And I just told you they had no disease. They have no classic disease where there's not plaque laid down. Here's the disease they have. When you have beaten down your endothelial cells for year after year after year after year, they no longer are your friend. They are your enemy. And they are now making 2 molecules that are working against you. They are called thromboxane and endothelin. Those 2 molecules that the endothelium is now making are vasoconstrictive. So when we see these people, no plaque in these thousands of intramuscular arteries, but they're all constricted. So once they get it right, and they run into somebody who is mean as I am, and who asks them to have vegetables, green leafy vegetables, 6 times a day, suddenly that entire intramuscular cascade of vessels stops making the vasoconstrictor endothelin or thromboxane, starts making the vasodilator nitric oxide. And you enlarge this entire cascade of vessels, dilates. And if you recall in physics, Poiseuille's law of flow through the hollow viscous is related to the 4th power of the radius. Translation, a tiny increase in diameter, a huge increase in flow, which is why those patients do so well, okay? Now here's a summary of, when I say disease reversal, these are the 8 ways that you can identify disease reversal. The one you're all thinking about probably is the one that I showed you on the angiogram. Okay, but then you can reverse the stress test. I just showed you the PET scan that reversed. I talked to you about the carotid ultrasound reversal in somebody like Bob Mercer from Newfoundland. We've talked about pulse volume and Don reversing. And then the symptoms of angina disappearing, Claudication, pain in the calf, disappearing. Erectile dysfunction, disappearing. Pretty exciting when you think about it. Now, this is the building in the Cleveland Clinic where on the 8th floor, I worked for many years as a surgeon. However, when I retired from surgery, I ended up getting rehired by the Cleveland Clinic in the Wellness Institute, where the budget is a little bit more modest, but the morale is high. Now, I promised you that the reason that I'm so passionate today, 16 years after having retired from surgery, why am I still beating the bushes and traveling around and doing the research? Because truly, medicine is at the absolute cusp of what could be a seismic revolution in health. And the seismic revolution in health that is going to occur in this country, or can occur in this country, will never come about from a pill, a drug, a procedure like stents, or operations like bypass. The seismic revolution in health will come about when we in the profession are willing to show the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them to be the locus of control to halt many, many, many chronic diseases. It's just not heart disease. When we're treating patients with heart disease, their diabetes disappears, their obesity disappears, their hypertension disappears, their risk for stroke disappears, the likelihood of vascular dementia disappears, Crohn's disease disappears, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, allergies, asthma, and the list goes on. And it's just so exciting and so powerful. But there are enormous, enormous economic forces that are waged against this. But what is going to make this prevail is not the hype and the snake oil, but it's going to be the fact that we do science. And that's why I think it's so imperative that those of us who are touting this on the basis of our experience with patients should be obligated to write up those results and publish them in peer-reviewed scientific literature, which is what I encourage all of our other younger staff who are coming through and or sharing time with us at the program. Even if they just have 1 or 2 cases, write them up. How many articles were in print, scientific print, before the Surgeon General in 1964 was willing to say that smoking was hazardous to your health? 7,000 articles. Hopefully, for God's sakes, it won't take that many. But it's emblematic of the challenge. And I always close with this young damsel. 1939, Life magazine, trying to learn how to do the splits. And the splits are important, no question. And much as I admire in the 56 years since I left medical school, much as I admire brains are certainly important, but nothing can be as important as persistence, 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 best exemplified by this young damsel in 1939 Life magazine, because the other day, downtown Baltimore, Gwen spotted her and she got it right. And just this past year, it's been so exciting to see leadership in cardiology. Kim Williams is a wonderful cardiologist from Rush Presbyterian Hospital in Chicago. And Kim himself found that he could bring his cholesterol down significantly with being plant-based. He's done plant-based for his patients for years. And 2 years ago, as part of his presidential address at the American College of Cardiology, he clearly enunciated many of the things that I'm sharing with you tonight. Here is a picture of Kim Williams. So, I want to say once again, thank you to Gwen and her staff for this privilege to share my passion with you this evening, and I'd love to try to tackle some questions. But before I do, I want to leave you with an old Tibetan proverb. Eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Thank you.